Let's continue exploring the mechanics behind item sorters. I'm your host, OmLedu, and in this video we're going to look at how to stack filters. Traditionally, we just line filters up in a row and have them each sorting a single item into a chest. But alternatively, we can stack the filters on top of each other and merge their outputs. Of course, we can still tile these next to each other in long rows and end up with something like this. What you see here will sort 30 different items down into 10 rows of chests. But you could expand this infinitely, build more vertical rows, horizontal cells, or even zigzag it above the ceiling or behind a wall. The number of items that get sorted into each row of chests is totally customizable. You can keep it at a static average, or you can have some chests sort a single item and others sort 16 or 32 items. Recently, we've talked a lot about slot sorters because they are a super cheap and easy way to sort multiple items down into single chests. We even went over how to add bulk filters to a slot sorter to compensate for some of the misses limitations. However, stacking filters ends up sorting multiple items down into single chests without any of the misses limitations. Before we jump into the build tutorial, let's go over some of the basic mechanics, starting with the two different types of filters. So here we have an overflow protected filter that has 3 dust. Basically, any filter that has 3 dust will be overflow protected. And what that means is that if the items in the output fill up and back up into the filter hopper, it will never break or drain neighboring cells because the strength can never reach a strength of 4. Whereas here we have a non-overflow protected filter. It only has 2 dust, and the second dust is being redirected into the torch via that piston. But with the non-overflow protected, if the output fills up and overflows into your filter hopper, the strength will reach a strength of 3, which will drain and break neighboring cells. Now, even though the non-overflow protected is smaller, the overall redstone will remain the same size regardless of which filter you use, just because of how much room we need to have in between the intake lines. The main benefits to using the non-overflow protected design is that it requires less items to be trapped, and then also if you're building this above a ceiling, it is a little bit shorter, so it's easier to hide the redstone and build the ceiling higher up. The main thing to think about when stacking filters is your intake line. Your intake line is this tube that the items travel through that needs to go all the way from the input to the output and pass by all of the rows of filters. So how your intake line is set up will basically dictate where your input and your output are and where you can put filters. So something like this that weaves out and then back around has your output be on the right side, whereas your input is on the left side. Then we also have it one block apart right here, 2 of the item lines, which allows you to mirror filters next to each other or across from each other and combine them into one. So here we have 2 filters being merged into that, being funneled down into a 3rd filter right here. So this would filter out 3 different items. So the way that you merge filters together is what dictates the items that will be in each vertical row of chests. So like we could have a single one just for cobblestone, and then have the next one have 5 different items for all of the variants of stone. Or, whatever combination of items that you want to sort down into single rows of chests. But without further ado, let's jump into the build tutorial. So for this example, I'm going to start off with just a single side and sideways chests, and then I'm going to talk about how to curve it around a corner and how to use horizontal chests. So no matter how you want to lay it out, hopefully you will understand and be able to get it done. Now, your input chest and your overflow chests, your input and your output, are highly dependent upon your item line, like we talked about before. This is going to change constantly just depending on what design you use and how many layers you build. If you zigzag it above a ceiling or behind a wall, like with this first example, just curving it around one time with 2 layers, your input and your overflow will be on the same side, because you just reversed the direction one time. Whereas if we curve it above a ceiling, like this design right here, well, now your input is on one side, the left in this example, and your overflow will be on the opposite side, because it changes direction 2 times. Of course, you could always just add more hopper lines or a dropper elevator to change where your output is or to connect this to other systems. It's just good to keep these things in mind before you start. Because if you have a specific place that you want your input and output to be, that will be dictated by your item line. As for the build area, you will need 6 blocks of space behind your storage chest, and your item line will be 2 blocks behind your storage chest as well. So if you're curving this around a corner or in a zigzag or something, those are just things to keep in mind. And you can expand the number of chests in any direction. Expanding it horizontally will increase the number of items being sorted, and increasing it vertically will increase the storage for those items. For this example, we're just going to have 2 chests per vertical row, but you could always expand it down or up. That is all totally up to you. Just the filters are going to attach to the topmost chests, so it doesn't matter how many chests you have. And then we'll talk about how to move the input and the output later on. Once you've figured out how many storage chests you want, we need to place a hopper pointed into the back of each of those chests. Now on top of the top row of hopper, we need to place a line of chests that are facing sideways so that they don't connect to each other. Now we need another row of hoppers pointed into the backs of these chests, and this is where your filters are going to attach to. So we need 3 solid blocks attached to the back of each of these filters, just going all the way down. No matter how many cells you have, it is all built the same. Then we need targets under there with torches on the side. So these torches will be powering the block above them, and therefore locking the hoppers that are touching those blocks. Then above these, we need another row of hoppers, but this row needs to be pointed back into those blocks. These are your filter hoppers, and they need to be pointed toward the back. Then diagonally down from your targets, we need a row of blocks. Then diagonally up from that, we need another row, and we need to place dust on top of these back 2 rows. Then after we've placed our dust, we need to place glass above this dust right here. Then place dust on top of the glass, and then turn and face toward the back, and place comparators pointed into all of this dust. So these comparators are looking directly at your filter hopper through those solid blocks. Comparators can see things through solid blocks. Now we just need an item line above our filters. So remember that the hoppers will always be pointed toward your output, because the items are flowing from the input to the output. So whichever direction your hoppers are pointed is the direction the items are moving. And we just need a hopper line above our filters sticking out 1 block past where our filters are. And we're going to build this other section later on, so for now we're going to pretend that our overflow output is right here. And an overflow is simply hoppers pointed into the back of chest to collect items that get skipped or that aren't being sorted. So it's as simple as just hoppers pointed into chests wherever you want this to be, at the end of the line. But your filter section is now complete. We can just stack as many of these on top of each other as we want to, and then just attach the input and the overflow to these filters. So from the hopper that is sticking out past the filters, we're going to go up by 4 hoppers. Each row is going to have 3 blocks in between the row, or 3 hoppers in between the row. So attach this top one, we're just going to build another row aligned with the bottom one. And remember that each row that you build essentially reverses the direction the items are traveling. This top one is going to the left and the bottom one is going to the right. Because your intake line is just a tube. It's like a straw, and you're bending the straw to go in different directions. So if we want our input to be back over here on the left, or if we want to build filters above the ceiling, we can curve the hopper line back around like you see here. And if you plan on building filters on both sides of this loop around, if you extend it to have 2 blocks of space in between each row, the filters won't have to automatically connect. But if you build it like you see here, with only 1 block in between these 2 rows, the topmost filters will merge in the center. And we'll talk more about that later on, but as we can see, our intake line now starts over on this side. And if we wanted it to be on the other side, we could just build another layer going up, or another loop around. But regardless of which direction your intake line goes, luckily your item filters don't care, and they will all be the same. They will just start diagonally down from your intake line. And we're going to build this the exact same way that we built the one under it. And don't worry, I will build the non-overflow protected filters right after this. I just wanted to include an example of stacking overflow protected on top of each other, since this is kind of the generic safe design. But as we can see, the top one is pressed right up against the bottom one. The bottom block of the top one is touching the dust on top of the glass for the bottom one. But these are built exactly the same, block for block. Don't forget the torches on the side of the targets, and then don't forget that your filter hoppers are pointed into those blocks right there. And the filter hoppers are directly below the intake line. And then the next row of hoppers needs to be pointed out into a row of chests. Now you can technically use any container, but the chest will give you more control over how many items get merged later on. But now we need another row of filters here on this other side. And for this one, we'll be using the piston-based non-overflow protected design. And of course, you could replace any of these with the piston-based design if you so desire. So we're going to start off right here with these chests, point some hoppers into the sides of those chests to give us a starting point. Now for the piston-based one, we need a solid block next to the output hoppers next to those chests, then a row of glass behind those solid blocks. Then diagonally down from that glass, we need another row of solid blocks. Then we need a row of pistons all facing the same direction under the glass. Now at the very end of the last piston, we need a block of obsidian to prevent these pistons from ever moving. That obsidian is very important because if the pistons move, it will break all of the torches that we placed on the sides of them. But now we need 2 rows of dust, and then comparators facing toward that dust, like so. Now we need to place in our filter hoppers, but this time we need the filter hoppers pointed at the comparators. Now if you're having trouble aiming at the comparators to place the hoppers, you can always replace them with temporary blocks to give you something easier to aim at to place the hoppers. Basically, filter hoppers just need to not be pushing into any container. So it's just always safe when building these to have the filter hopper pointed toward the back, because there's never going to be any container where the comparators are. Now we have 2 rows of filters that are all being merged in pairs here in the center. You know, one on each side is each pushing into the same chest, therefore being merged. And that's where if you build this 1 block farther apart, that would give you more room so they don't have to be pushing into the same chest. But now all that's left is to determine what items we want to go into each chest. And then to merge the top sections with the bottom sections is as simple as adding some chest and hoppers. So now this very first one is sorting 3 different items into the same chest, 2 from the top and then 1 from the bottom into this row right here. Now before we load our filters, we do need to name an item on an anvil. So just take any junk item that stacks to 64 and name it something unique, so that this will never go through your sorting system. These named items are going to be your hopper filler. So now we need to go to our filter hoppers. Remember that these are the ones pointed back toward the comparator, and we need to load these to program them to sort a certain item. Now for the overflow protected design that has 3 dust and a target, we need to place 1 of the named item in the last 4 slots, and then at least 1 of the item being sorted in the first slot. And you will always have 41 of that item trapped in the filter hopper. Then for the non-overflow protected design that has a piston and 2 dust, these are going to be slightly different. So your filter is still the one pointed into the comparator, but we need to be careful not to place an entire stack of items into this hopper. We just want to place 3 of the item being sorted into the very first slot, and regardless of whether this item stacks to 16 or 64, we want to place 1 of our filler item in the last 4 slots, and then slowly place in more filler items until 1 item falls through. So for items that stack to 64, you will have 20 filler items and then 2 items in the first slot. But if your item stacked to 16, you still want to have 2 of that item in the first slot, but you will probably need less filler items. Now the reason we want to be very careful and not put in too many items is that if this reaches a strength of 3, it will drain the neighboring sections. So if you just shift click to insert a full stack into the filter hopper, it will drain the neighboring cells. And that's bad, so be very careful when loading the non-overflow protected designs. And as you load your filter hoppers, just keep in mind of which ones are being merged. So like this first one is just a single filter from the front and the back, merging with the bottom one. So that one's easy. We just do the ones that are opposite from each other, and we're going to merge the 3 types of cobblestone. So there we go. We are now merging stairs, walls, and slabs down into this very first chest. And remember that just because each slice has 3 filters, you don't have to sort 3 items per chest. So like this second row, we could just have it sort only cobblestone and nothing else. Just have 1 bulk storage just for our cobblestone, where the first chest is for all the variations of our cobblestone. This is totally fine. And like the more chests that only sort 1 item, the more available chests you have at the top to merge down into the next row. So like this one, we could merge all of the different types of stone, or 5 different types of stone bricks. or really how many ever filters you want to combine down into single chests. Like to merge these 4 together, all we have to do is turn this chest sideways, and now all 4 of them are pushing into the same container. Then we just run this down to the bottom filter, and now that row will be sorting 5 different items. Now, when you're merging these down, you could just use hoppers. It's just a little easier to insert a chest there in the middle, in between the hoppers, and this also helps give you more overflow to protect your non-overflow protected design. It gives you more storage for items to build up in, so that it's harder for the items to start building up in your filter hoppers before you notice it. Because again, if items start building up in your filter hoppers, for the non-overflow protected design, it will end up draining the neighboring cells, and then those cells will have empty slots, so now all items will just pour down into those, and you'll have to go in and remove those items from their storage and redo your filters. Now for the overflow protected versions, if you don't want to have 41 of the item trapped in the first slot, you can add more filler items. This is fine, however, if you add more filler items, it will no longer be overflow protected. So if this fills up, again, it will break the neighboring cells, drain them, and break the entire system, and you'll have to redo it. So for common items, just leave 41 of that item in the first slot. But for rare items, it would be fine. So just continue this process until you have all of the items that you want merged together, merged together. And now let's talk about the input. So right off the bat, technically you could just throw a chest up here, add a few hoppers and just toss a chest up here. Have your input be really high and your output be really low. Honestly, this is what I usually do because I like to have my input easy access where I don't have to go inside of my item storage just to deposit some items. However, of course, if you want a dropper elevator, you can totally do this as well. So start off just by having a tower of droppers pointed up, and I would recommend having these droppers pointed into a chest that is connected to the item line rather than directly to the hoppers. This is just in case you're like double loading the dropper elevator or something. It avoids potential problems. And then of course you could always have some easy unloaders just by adding some additional hoppers, toss your shulkers on there to be unloaded or whatever you want to do. But to power the dropper elevator, we need to start off by placing solid blocks next to the bottom one and then on every other dropper going up. Then place torches on top of each of these blocks and make sure that none of these torches and none of these blocks are touching a hopper. You want there to be at least one block of air around your elevator, no hoppers touching any of that stuff. Then we're going to place a comparator looking at the bottom dropper through that block, going into a repeater, into a solid block, then turn around and have a comparator pointed into that solid block as well. Then another comparator pointed the other direction, then 3 dust. And make sure that none of this is connected to your other redstone. So be aware of that redstone torch and that dust. Just keep this totally separate. Now we need a dust next to that block, going into a comparator on subtraction mode, into a block, and then some dust pointed into this very first block right here. Then another solid block next to that, a repeater pointed back toward the comparator, and then dust going into the side of that comparator. So this is what you should have. Now this is just an extended clock to make sure that no items are ever left idle in your dropper elevator. To demonstrate how this works, we're going to toss in one item, and as we can see, it continues activating even after that item is gone. So anytime there are items in that bottom dropper, this comparator will activate, which will power this extender, which will keep the clock on after the items have gone, so that no item is left idle in the dropper elevator because it keeps activating even after items are gone. And then over here is just the clock to power the redstone torches going up, which then power the droppers. And that's it. Now any item that you put in the input will go up the dropper elevator through the system, get pulled out by the filters, merged as you merged them using the chests, and then any items that didn't get sorted will end up here at the end of the intake line, or in your overflow chest. But now let's go over some more examples of how you can further customize these systems. How you can turn corners, how you can expand it, how you turn your chest sideways, all of that good stuff. So hopefully you'll have a better understanding of how to build your own custom storage. Starting off, if you want to turn your chest sideways, you just turn them sideways. Everything else remains the same. You only need one hopper per chest, not one hopper per row. And you can actually use sideways chests to merge some of your filters together in custom ways as well. But when it comes to expanding a pre-existing system, Just remember that your item line is going to go 2 blocks behind your storage chests. Whether your storage chests are turned sideways or are front-facing, the item line still remains 2 blocks behind those chests. And so expanding, especially the end of a system, is super easy. You just run the hoppers to a new overflow chest section. It's as easy as that since they're already open-ended. Now, one thing to mention is that your overflow output can always have more chests than your filters because the overflow doesn't have any redstone behind it. So it can have chests all the way up to the item line because it's just hoppers pointed into chests. So if you want your output, your overflow, to be the same height as all your other chests, or if you just want to add more, that's all totally up to you. Now for the sideways chests, we still need containers on top of these hoppers for our filters to push into. And since the filters are every single block, this actually opens up another level of customization. So like if we break out one of these chests and turn it into a single chest and replace that with a hopper pointed into the next section, well now the first row of chest is only sorting 1 item, where this second row is sorting 3 items, because our filters are per block, per cell. And then this final row is sorting 2 items. So this is a further way that we can customize how many items are getting sorted into each chest. Usually I will build it like this because it gives me even more control. Not only that, but I personally like how front-facing chests look. I've never really been a fan of the sideways chest in the wall. It just doesn't look right to me. Plus, when using front-facing chest, you still have the same number of item sorters, but you have half as many rows of chests. So you're sorting more items on average per row. So it just depends on what you're trying to sort, where, and with what style you want to use, or what style would be more beneficial. But here we have the first row is sorting 1 item, the second row is sorting 3 items, and this final row is sorting 2 items. And then of course we can expand the top section as well. All we have to do is kind of break out some of these hoppers that are now pointed the wrong direction, and just expand this over. It is as simple as that to expand a pre-existing storage system. So just make sure all of the hoppers are facing in the same direction as they were, and just align it parallel with the bottom rows. Now you could even add filters in the corners or behind walls, and then just connect those over to chests with hopper lines in other chests. However you want to merge these things together is up to you. You could have 52 filters off behind a wall, and then just run those back to a chest using a hopper line. And now that chest would sort 52 items. How you do it is really up to you. Just remember that your intake line is a tube going from start to finish. But now let's wrap up this video with a few more examples of merging things together. So just remember that these chests that are coming off of the hoppers under the filter hoppers is what controls what is being merged. So if we do something like this, well now all of those are being merged into those middle 2 chests. And then we could run these down to a single row, even one of the rows off to the side, like so. And now our top row of filters, all 6 of these, are being funneled down into the same chest here on the very final row. So this final row is now sorting 8 items, 2 from the bottom, and then 6 from the top. So again, this is very customizable. However you want to do this is up to you. You could even expand this again, going off behind a wall to give you more filters to work with, or you could even mirror more filters bumped up next to each other that are like sharing redstone almost. Like it's okay if the redstone is connected. Now if it overflows, it will still interact with the opposite side, but as long as it doesn't overflow, they will never interact. And the overflow protected design will be overflow protected even if they're mirrored and sharing redstone. The signal will never reach a strength of 4, so they will never interact with each other. So as an example, we're going to connect all of these new filters that we mirrored over to the same chest, just by running a hopper line going all the way across, connecting these new filters to the old filters. And we're just going to pretend that the intake line is actually covering all of these. But now all of these sections are being filtered into this section over here. So now this final row of chest is sorting like 20 different items. How many ever filters this is, maybe it's sorting all of the colors of concrete, or all the colors of wool. So just, it doesn't matter how many items you want each row to sort. That is all totally up to you. This is definitely my go-to whenever I build my personal storage systems. This is always what I do. it has the same capabilities as like a categorizer or a miss without the limitations. You know, like categorizers, in my opinion, just suck. They have tons of limitations, they can break, they can't really be connected to other systems. There are tons of reasons why categorizers are bad. But miss sorters, you know, they're cheap, they're easy, but you have to leave an item behind, so they're not very friendly for bulk storage. You know, for blocks and stuff like that. You know, so I'll usually build like a teeny tiny miss for like flowers or something, stuff that I don't use very often, and then I'll build stacked filters for everything else. So I can just grab them and go. You know, they're standard hopper speed. You don't have to worry about like bottlenecking or unloading them or them breaking. They are so super user friendly. And with filters, you could even build the faster ones. You could build the ×2 filters, you know, or water stream filters, or the ×4 or ×8 minecart filters, you know, and just merge them all together. That would work as well. But that's all we got for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, share, and subscribe. Be sure to leave a comment, even if it's just to say hi. Always remember that you are totally awesome, and above all, don't forget to have fun. Bye-bye!